Hey, this is Lisa Graves with Legal AF here at Court Accountability Action, and I hope you'll subscribe and like and share because today we have a fantastic discussion of a new report coming out from the People's Parity Project on No Kings and the need for court reform. And I'm so honored to have Jenny Hunter join us for the conversation. We're going to do this in two parts. Jenny's a labor lawyer, and she is the writer who wrote this must-read report about the imperative for reforming the United States Supreme Court. Jenny, welcome to Legal AF.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, well, tell us about this labor of love that you, or maybe it's not so much love, but this labor of love you wrote so that people understand what's gone wrong with the Roberts Court and also what they can do about it. This first part, we're going to talk about what's gone wrong and your observations, your findings, and then second part, we'll talk about what people could do about it.
Great. Thank you so much. So yes, this report, which I wrote in People's Parity Project, published on Monday, is called No Kings, The Urgent Need for Court Reform. And like it says, it highlights how dire the need is to reform the federal courts as part of the project, eventually of both fighting autocracy and rebuilding a stronger democracy. So we released it at the beginning of what is unfortunately going to be a real doozy of a Supreme Court term, because the attention on the court right now kind of gives an opportunity to have the conversation about what is going to need to change eventually so that we can have a functioning democracy.
Yeah, I was going to say, so can you dive into some of the recent decisions and also some of the and then maybe we'll take up some of the cases you're particularly worried about, as am I. But share with folks some of your major findings about what this court has done and has been doing.
Yeah. So the report is based on an analysis of the Trump litigation, by which we mean the hundreds of cases that were filed in federal court since the beginning of this year, since the beginning of the Trump administration through September 1st, challenging the Trump administration's flood of illegal actions. So it shows how court reform could be used as a tool to fight authoritarianism by changing the outcomes of those kinds of cases at the Supreme Court level, and also strengthening democracy, but still preserving litigation as a tool to fight against injustice. So the story, you could say, of the court this year, the federal courts in general, is that the lower federal courts have really been doing a great job. They've been doing what judges should do, which is, they look at the facts of the cases, they apply the law and the Constitution, they explain their reasoning, and they say, this broke the law. And since the administration's actions have been so blatantly illegal in most cases, they've been losing really badly. And before judges appointed by presidents of both parties in the lower courts, they've lost 77% of those cases between February and May at the district court level. But then at the Supreme Court level, as you know, the story completely flips around. So the administration has been running to the Roberts Court when it loses in the lower courts and asking it to intervene on an emergency basis. And the Roberts Court has done that and ruled in the administration's favor 79% of the time in those emergency cases this year, up through September 1st. And most of those orders have been really short, unsigned, no explanation. And they've allowed the administration to gut the Department of Education, ban transgender service members from the military, proceed with mass firings, deport people to countries that they don't have any connection to, really terrible things, and creating this constitutional crisis that we find ourselves in.
Your report is just so well written and well analyzed, Jenny, and I'm so glad that People's Parity Project has done this work, this service to the American people, because as you point out, the lower courts have been actually following the law and finding these extraordinary actions by Donald Trump to be in violation of the Constitution or statutes or regulations and rules. And I can't help but think, this is my own observation, that when John Roberts, purportedly rebuked Trump, but in fact, what he said to Trump was, these aren't final. Don't attack these decisions. They're not final. I felt like that was sly. That was like with a wink and a nod, like, I've got your back. We're going to overturn these. And that's exactly what happened. Those lower court rulings that were well-reasoned, well-grounded in the law, legal precedent, and statutes have been disregarded arrogantly, aggressively by the Roberts Court, by the Republican majority appointed to this court without in over the course of the summer and in some of the rulings as the last term was going on, without any opinion rationalizing why the Supreme Court, this faction of the court is disregarding longstanding legal precedents. And that's resulted, like you said, in this flip where the US Supreme Court has overturned temporary restraining order after temporary restraining order in favor of Trump. You begin this report with a quote about Trump's response, his claim of his power. Can you describe, in your view, how these rulings, not just the immunity, the unprecedented grant of immunity for Donald Trump has emboldened him, but how these rulings have helped embolden him further?
Yes, for sure. I mean, so the court has just rubber stamped a number of things that the Trump administration has done, like you said, with no explanation. And then some of the justices have been sort of lecturing lower court judges, like, you need to be following our holdings, even when there isn't a holding, there's no reasoning to follow. And by doing that, even though it hasn't been most of the cases, it's been a few dozen, but they have given them the go ahead to proceed in those kinds of ways in other contexts. So like they, in McMahon versus New York, allowed the gutting of the Department of Education. Well, then that, suggests to lower court judges, am I supposed to allow them to gut other agencies? Am I supposed to allow them to do all these other like cancellations of federal contracts and grants with no explanation? There's been several different cases about whether the administration can fire leaders without cause. And the administration went ahead and let them do that despite an 80-year-old law and, decades of precedent saying that you can't do that. And so then that again tells the lower courts, you're supposed to allow these kind of firings in other cases as well. And just in case after case, it creates uncertainty. It encourages the administration to flout lower court decisions because they know they can just go to the Supreme Court most likely and get an okay for whatever they've done.
Yeah, it's really extraordinary. It's a bit like an out of control teenager when the mother says, no, you can't do that. And then the kid runs to the other parent, right? to the father on with home visits or something, the weekend dad, to say, hey, but can I do this? But it's far more dangerous than that, obviously. In fact, as you note at the beginning of the report, Donald Trump asserted previously that I have an Article 2 where I have the right to do whatever I want as president. And then he recently reiterated that claim regarding Chicago and more. And even this past week has asserted that he can just invoke the Insurrection Act when there's not actually any insurrection at all, even though he himself was charged with fomenting an insurrection. And then he himself pardoned people who were convicted of violent acts in support of that insurrection, that attack on our Capitol. So it really is an upside down world we're seeing. Can you talk a little bit about some of the cases to come? Like my concern, it's not just that the court has been issuing these orders without the rationales to overturn these really important and well-grounded rulings of these lower court judges, but now it's going to have the time to sort of unspool a pretext, a rationale for what they've been doing, when in fact what the court has been doing has been basically mowing down laws to aid Trump, to support Trump's political agenda, and without any regard to the fact that these are partisan rulings where all the Republicans are finding in favor of a Republican president, to let a Republican president do almost anything he wants in violation of like budgets. Budgets aren't just like a theory like you wrote on the back of your checkbook.
Yeah, it's a law.
It's a law, right?
Mm-hmm.
Congress passed it as a negotiating matter. President signing the law. These are commitments that have been made to make grants or to fund agencies. And Trump is getting away with just disregarding those laws with the aid of this Roberts Court. And there's more to come. So what's coming up that you're looking at and watching out for?
Yeah, well, just today, the court heard arguments about whether states can ban the really harmful practice of conversion therapy, where therapists try to change a child's sexual orientation or gender identity. There's a number of cases which kind of fall into one of the big categories we talk about in the report, which is the Supreme Court has this real penchant for striking down federal laws as unconstitutional. So they may destroy part of what remains of the Voting Rights Act and campaign finance laws, allowing, even more unlimited floods of money into our politics. They're going to, again, finally decide whether the president can fire federal leaders without cause in complete direct violation of multiple federal laws, whether the president can impose tariffs, on a whim without any congressional approval. They'll all, like you said, almost certainly decide whether the president can deploy troops to put down protests in American cities based on made up facts. And so a lot of these, some of, like the conversion therapy case doesn't involve this, but a lot of them involve the Supreme Court looking at a federal law that's been there for years and saying, nah, I don't like it. I'm going to strike this down. And in some of these shadow docket cases, they've essentially done that, but without giving any reasoning. Now they're going to have time to, I guess, back up and figure out what their reasoning was. I don't know that they even know, and it doesn't completely matter. But that's one of the main that we can talk about in our second half. But one of the main areas that we talk about in the report is that court reform, one of the things it can do is stop the federal courts from striking down federal laws as unconstitutional. So that if Congress, the people elect members of Congress and we say, we think there needs to be a voting rights law, that the courts can't just veto it. And that really would just blow the doors open on like what's possible for our future. Because right now we're really constrained, both elected officials and activists are constrained about what kinds of things you can even advocate for, because the Supreme Court is out there kind of as this boogeyman in the background, threatening to strike down any progressive laws they don't like.
Yeah, I mean, not only has John Roberts been the kingmaker in terms of exonerating Trump, relieving him from being held accountable for his actions on January 6th, but also paving his return to power. And so please come back for part 2, where we're going to talk about vital court reforms. But in the meantime, I hope folks will write in their calendars if you haven't already, October 18th. October 18th, No King's Day, peaceful demonstrations in support of our freedoms. Jenny, can you take us out with a little note about that, and then we'll come back in?
I'm really excited for the next No Kings protest. I've gone before, brought my kid. It's wonderful to see so many people gathered together fighting for our Constitution and our democracy. And I think that's what we need to do. Everybody should go.
All right. Well, this is Lisa Graves here with Court Accountability Action at Legal AF. And I've been talking with Jenny Hunter. We're going to conclude part 1. Please subscribe, please share, and come back for part 2.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.